For decades, Melinda Gates was seen as the perfect other half of one of the most powerful men in the world. A 27-year marriage, a global philanthropic empire, 3 children, and billions of dollars given away in the name of improving humanity. But in 2021, everything collapsed in silence. No loud scandals, no public legal battles, just a brief announcement that stunned the world. Melinda Gates was leaving Bill Gates. At age 61, many years after the $76 billion divorce, she finally began to speak clearly about what the public had long suspected. This was not an impulsive decision, but the result of prolonged deception and an erosion of trust that could not be repaired. Behind her calm exterior lay a decades-long internal struggle, in which a woman was forced to choose between preserving a flawless image and being honest with herself. Before the world knew Melinda Gates as a symbol of soft power and global philanthropy, she was first a girl raised within the strict discipline of a middle-class family in Dallas, Texas. Born in 1964, Melinda Ann French grew up in an environment where achievement, responsibility, and precision were not options, but standards. Her father, an aerospace engineer involved in NASA's Apollo program, brought home a work ethic from an industry that allowed no margin for error. Family conversations revolved around doing things right, seeing things through, and taking responsibility for your choices. From a very young age, Melinda was taught that security does not come from luck, but from equipping oneself with capability. At just 10 years old, she helped her father paint and renovate rental apartments, not as play, but as a practical lesson in labor and the value of money. By age 12, Melinda was already keeping the family's accounting records, learning to manage expenses in order to save for future college costs. These seemingly small tasks instilled in her an early awareness of control over her own life, that relying on others always comes with risk. At 14, Melinda encountered the Apple II computer and began teaching herself programming, at a time when technology was still considered a male-dominated domain. For her, computers were not merely tools, but gateways to logical thinking, where every problem could be analyzed, broken down, and solved systematically. This shaped a Melinda who was accustomed to questioning, verifying, and rejecting vague answers. When she graduated high school in 1982 as valedictorian, she carried not only an outstanding transcript, but also a deep belief that knowledge and independence were the only foundations capable of protecting a person's dignity. In hindsight, that family foundation did not merely produce an exceptional female leader, but also formed a woman with clear boundaries around her values. The steadfastness, the demand for transparency, and the inability to compromise with dishonesty, factors that would later become the underlying causes of her divorce, were in fact shaped long before, during those seemingly quiet childhood years. When Melinda French joined Microsoft in 1987, the company was still in the process of consolidating its power, and Bill Gates had not yet become the global icon he would later be. Yet the environment Melinda entered already bore all the characteristics of a pressure cooker: rapid pace, fierce competition, and virtually no room for weakness, especially for women. Her decision to decline an offer from IBM in favor of Microsoft was not merely a career choice, but a calculated gamble that reflected her confidence in her own abilities and adaptability. Melinda quickly established her position through results. She participated in and led landmark projects such as Cinemania, Encarta, and later Expedia, products that helped transform Microsoft from a pure software company into a technology ecosystem. Contrary to the later media portrayal of her as simply Bill Gates' wife, Melinda at Microsoft was first and foremost regarded as a strategic thinker, detail-oriented manager, and someone intolerant of ambiguity in objectives. However, that success did not come in a neutral environment. Microsoft's culture at the time was described by many former employees as heavily male-dominated, where aggressiveness was often equated with competence, and emotion was viewed as a weakness. Melinda had to learn to speak more forcefully than she felt comfortable with, defending her viewpoints in meeting rooms where the number of women could be counted on one hand. It was during this period that she developed the habit of emotional self-discipline, a skill that helped her survive and advance, but also planted the seeds of later internal isolation. Melinda's rise to the position of general manager, overseeing more than 1,700 employees, was a rare achievement for a woman in the technology industry at the time. But accompanying that power was a quiet paradox. The more successful she became, the more she had to sacrifice softer parts of herself to fit the machine. Decisions requiring toughness came one after another, while her personal life was gradually pushed into the background. When Melinda French and Bill Gates married in 1994 in Hawaii, it was not merely a personal event, but a union of two minds with significant influence in technology and management. Contrary to the common perception of a marriage based on unequal power, Melinda entered the relationship well prepared. She negotiated a rigorous prenuptial agreement, not out of mistrust, but because she believed legal equality was the foundation of lasting respect. For Melinda, love could only endure when both parties retained independent voices. By 1996, when she became pregnant with their first child, Melinda faced a pivotal choice. Leaving Microsoft was not simply a career step back, but the first time she consciously asked whether power and achievement still mattered, if they came at the cost of losing her own integrity. That decision at the time was seen as personal. In retrospect, it was an early signal that Melinda was always willing to walk away from the summit when her core values began to erode. After leaving Microsoft, Melinda did not disappear from intellectual life. On the contrary, she shifted her focus to philanthropy with a systematic approach similar to corporate management. In 2000, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was established, quickly becoming the largest private charitable organization in the world. In its early years, the foundation allocated more than $20 billion to global health initiatives, from eradicating polio and expanding immunization to improving maternal and child health in developing countries. Within the foundation's structure, Melinda was not merely a co-founder in name. She was deeply involved in setting strategic priorities, particularly programs related to women and girls. Her approach was grounded in fieldwork, listening to directly affected communities rather than relying solely on macro-level indicators. This difference in thinking helped expand the foundation's impact, but also created underlying tensions around decision-making and the distribution of power. By 2015, Melinda established Pivotal Ventures, an independent organization focused on advancing women's economic and political power. This move was seen as a clear indication of her growing need to separate her personal identity from the enormous shadow of her famous husband. While still operating alongside the Gates Foundation, Pivotal Ventures allowed Melinda the freedom to pursue what she considered urgent priorities, without having to compromise with other agendas. On the surface, their marriage was still regarded as a model union of intellect, wealth, and compassion. But within that structure, differences in values, approaches to power, and ethical standards had begun to form small cracks. They were not yet large enough to cause immediate collapse, but they were sufficient to raise the question of whether a shared empire could endure when its two founders were increasingly moving along divergent trajectories. As the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation continued to expand its global influence, everything on the surface still appeared to be operating smoothly. Massive donation figures, international conferences, and handshakes with world leaders created the image of an almost flawless philanthropic empire. But it was precisely during this period that Melinda began to confront a difficult reality. The core values she believed in were no longer being fully respected within the power structures surrounding her husband. In 2017, Melinda requested an independent investigation into allegations of sexual harassment at Cascade Investments, the firm that manages Bill Gates's personal assets. For her, this was not merely a legal or reputational issue, but a moral test. Melinda believed that any organization, large or small, must be held accountable for wrongdoing within it. However, according to multiple sources, Bill preferred to handle the matter more discreetly, aiming to avoid damage to the broader public image. This difference in response created a clear rift. To Melinda, silence was equivalent to complicity. To Bill, crisis management was seen as a way to protect the institution. These two approaches reflected two value systems that were increasingly diverging. One prioritizing ethics and transparency, the other emphasizing stability and managerial control. By 2019, already fragile trust was further tested when Microsoft's board launched an investigation into a past relationship between Bill Gates and a female engineer that had occurred around the year 2000. Although the incident had taken place many years earlier and did not lead to serious legal conclusions, its psychological impact on Melinda could not be dismissed. For her, the issue was not solely the behavior itself, but the prolonged lack of transparency and the sense that important truths had been concealed. During the same period, Melinda increasingly felt that her voice in major decisions was being narrowed. Although she still held a co-leadership role in name, she often had to struggle to ensure that concerns about ethics, organizational culture, and women's rights were placed on equal footing with other strategic objectives. This pressure did not stem from a single event, but accumulated over time, like small cracks continually being stretched. Outwardly, their marriage still appeared intact. But internally, trust, the most critical foundation, had begun to waver. Melinda was no longer certain that the values she upheld could continue to coexist with the man and the power system that Bill represented. It was from this point that the hardest questions began to form, not only about marriage, but about the ultimate limits of compromise in a life that had already been given too much to others. After many years of living in a state of doubt and self-suppression, Melinda Gates was finally forced to confront the truth she had long tried to avoid. There are limits that cannot continue to be compromised, even when the price of leaving is the loss of a marriage admired by the entire world. The final straw came from Bill Gates's prolonged association with Jeffrey Epstein, a man who had been convicted of sexually abusing minors. In 2013, Melinda was compelled to meet Epstein in an encounter she later described with a single word: repulsive. It was not merely personal discomfort, but a moral reflex from a woman who had devoted her life to fighting for the rights and safety of women and children worldwide. After that meeting, Melinda directly warned her husband. She believed that given Bill Gates's position, any association with someone like Epstein was unacceptable, both morally and in terms of social responsibility. What hurt her most, however, was not Epstein's past, but the fact that Bill continued to maintain the relationship in the years that followed. For Melinda, this was no longer an issue of personal mistakes, but the collapse of trust. She realized that the man she had married no longer shared the same ethical boundaries she considered inviolable. And in a relationship spanning decades, once trust disappears, intimacy, both emotional and psychological, cannot survive. While writing her book The Moment of Lift 2019, Melinda entered a severe internal crisis. Stories of women being abused and silenced around the world inadvertently reflected her own life back at her. She admitted that she began experiencing nightmares, prolonged insomnia, and for the first time had to face a painful question. Was she betraying the very values she advocated for, simply to maintain the image of a perfect marriage? That realization made Melinda understand how much of her personal identity she had traded to stand beside a powerful man. Not because she was weak, but because for many years she believed silence was the necessary price for a greater mission. But by that point, she understood clearly, no mission is noble enough to justify the loss of one's own integrity. And when Melinda Gates finally accepted that truth, the decision to divorce was no longer an emotional choice. It became the inevitable outcome of a long journey in which trust had been depleted and compromise had exceeded its final limit. When the divorce was officially finalized in August 2021, Melinda Gates did not call it an ending, but the next day, the first day she could live fully as herself. After nearly 3 decades alongside one of the most powerful men in the world, she stepped out of the marriage quietly, without attacks or spectacle, but with rare decisiveness. In 2024, Melinda made a symbolic decision, leaving the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the organization she had co-founded and devoted most of her life to building. For the public, it was a shock. For Melinda, it was a necessary step to fully close an old chapter in which every achievement was tied to someone else's name. She devoted all her energy to pivotal ventures, expanding projects focused on women's economic empowerment, mental health care, and safety for vulnerable families. Unlike before, Melinda no longer remained behind the scenes. She spoke directly, made decisions directly, and accepted both criticism and expectations placed upon her. In 2025, Melinda released her memoir The Next Day, a book not about money or power, but about how quiet dishonesty can erode a relationship. In it, she candidly acknowledged that what destroyed her marriage was not only specific mistakes, but the disappearance of respect for truth. And when honesty vanishes, intimacy cannot exist. At age 61, Melinda Gates also confirmed that she is in a new relationship, but this time she speaks little about the man beside her. Instead, she emphasizes the sense of peace that comes from being herself, without hiding, without compromising her core values. Melinda shared that the hardest part was not leaving, but accepting that she had stayed too long. Yet it was precisely that late awakening that allowed her to enter a new phase of life with greater calm, clarity, and freedom than ever before. Ultimately, Melinda Gates' story is no longer about a billion-dollar divorce. It is the journey of a woman willing to trade outward security to preserve what is most precious, integrity and the right to define her own happiness. It also reminds us of a simple truth. Even the most powerful, wealthy, and admired women in the world can become trapped in a marriage where honesty no longer exists. And sometimes, the bravest act is not staying to preserve a perfect image, but leaving to preserve oneself. At 61, Melinda did not start over from zero. She started over from the truth. And that, above all, is the most solid foundation for freedom and peace. If you find this story thought-provoking, please press like to support the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss in-depth analyses of the hidden sides of power, fame, and rarely told truths. And share this video with someone who may need to hear that leaving is not always failure. And what about you? In your view, what is more dangerous in a marriage? Betrayal or prolonged dishonesty over many years? If you were in Melinda Gates' position, would you choose to leave earlier or continue to stay for the sake of family, responsibility, and the pressure of the world's gaze? Leave a comment below, because sometimes shared thoughts can help others find the courage for their own next day.